Consulting Sourcing, the only podcast about consulting procurement. I am Hélène, a consulting sourcing expert and your host for your favorite podcast. I am beyond excited to have touched the 3-digit episode in my podcast series. In today's episode, we will celebrate this milestone by walking you through the behind-the-scenes stories about producing this podcast. I have Laurent, the chairman of Consulting Quest, with me to anchor the conversation.
Hi, it's hard to believe it has been 100 episodes already. Congratulations, Hélène.
Thanks. Time really does fly when you're having fun. So whether you've been with us from the very beginning or you're just joining us now, we hope you enjoy this special episode. Thank you again for listening. However, before we get into that, let me give you a quick recap of last week's episode. A procurement strategy is a process that fits with the overall business strategy of your company. But remember, procurement strategy is an ongoing process. It can be tweaked, changed, and improved along the way, as data analytics will provide new insight into what works best for you. So it's clear that having a procurement strategy is important for any organization, but it requires to have in mind the overall strategy and a consulting budget. And then use the different levers that I mentioned in the podcast last week: consulting strategy, make or buy, etc. But again, the strategy you will define is strongly linked to your company's context, organization, and ambition. And that's procurement strategy for consulting. Its real essence lies in the value it delivers for your organization. And if you have not already implemented a procurement strategy for your consulting category, maybe it's time to stop. You can listen to our podcast about procurement strategy and why it is important for consulting.
Moving to the 100th episode, we got some exciting times, but also some rough time, and I'm well placed to speak about it. But overall, at the end of the day, I assume that you recall mostly the best times. Making it to the 100th episode of a podcast series is not a mean feat. It signifies nearly 2 years of strong dedication, extensive research, and constant updating of your expertise and knowledge. How do you feel about this success?
So obviously a sense of achievement. As you're saying, in the last 2 years, we've done a lot of work, of research, and now it's starting to pay with new listeners, with new visibility, new exposure. So in that sense, really, really happy that we're here today.
So tell us, what inspired you to start this podcast? And what did you want to achieve through this effort?
So it's a funny thing. 2 years ago, I was not sure that people would even listen to a podcast on how to buy consulting services. It's quite a niche topic, but we had just wrote a book and realized that there were not much literature out there on how to buy consulting services. And so we thought it could be a good way to promote the book first, to establish our thought leadership, but also to share our knowledge with the procurement community.
So we know the goals you had in mind when you started the podcast. So now, tell us, how much of this has been accomplished?
All right. So we started small. It's just like a plant. You start small. You have nothing at first, and you just do your episodes, and no one is listening. Like literally, no one. No, that's not true. Your husband, your kids, your grandmother, all of them are listening, but that's pretty much it. And then, little by little, it starts to take, and some people are listening and they're asking questions, and you get more and more precise on your content, you go a little bit deeper, and we're still in that. At some point, you will probably get to a point where you have it all, but we're obviously not there. We're still in the growing phase, and we have still, some surprises for the near future for you.
Would you consider you have established some thought leadership authority?
I would say so. I hope it's not a little bit like arrogant or pretentious, but I say yes. I think that we're starting to be recognized as an expert in that domain. And the question we get after the podcast and through our different channels, LinkedIn and so on, are more and more precise and more technical. And I think that's a sense that we are becoming a reference. And I think also the work that we're doing on webinars and also white papers is also happening in establishing our thought leadership.
I hear you also launched a community.
Yes, that's right. So we have now a community, a group on LinkedIn that's called Smart Consulting Sourcing the Community, very original. And now we're starting to get some traction and some dynamic in that group. We just reached 100 members last week, so it's getting somewhere as well.
So coming back to the podcast, and particularly launching a podcast, what did you learn during the journey?
That many things that we've learned, obviously. First thing is about having a podcast itself. It's a long journey. And we started with a short podcast. It was under 10 minutes. We're now more between 10 and 15 minutes. It's a very short format. We made it on purpose that short because we thought about commute. That was the kind of the things that we need to have people listening for the podcast during the commute. That was the first thing. So it has to be short. And the other thing is that I don't know about you, but personally, when the podcasts are too long, at some point, either I switch off, I just stop, or I don't remember half of what have been said. And I can't, get all that information taken in. And so we decided to go for a short format with very, very simple ideas and just stick to that. But the thing is, it's really hard. It's hard to be always synthetic, to get right to the point, to say everything that has to be said, even technical stuff, without simplifying too much, but without being inaccurate at the same time. So this is kind of that was tough. So now I think we're getting there. That's what the first thing. The second thing is also, when you do a podcast at the beginning, you want to say it very fast and you're very excited. And so you're kind of like those super, super fast. And it's not your real voice. It's not your real pace. It's not your real rhythm. And now after 2 years, I think I'm so used to it that I don't need to rush in, and I'm much more calmer when I record it. That's kind of how you do the podcast. But what is funny is that it's also helped us broaden our horizon on procurement itself. Because when you have to find a new topic every week you have to find a new topic, something that is new, different, something that is attractive to people. So consulting procurement is very niche. So I would say that we have been like a 360 on whatever is needed to do consulting procurement well. But the podcast made us go a little bit further to explore other topics that were not maybe obviously linked to consulting procurement, and see how it applies to procurement for consulting services. For instance, we covered topics like global procurement, global sourcing, or sustainable procurement that are not necessarily obvious for an intangible category like consulting, but we were able to find something, and there's our topic that were not covered in the book. So that was new research and new content and kind of a little bit of thinking to say, what's our position on that? And how does that apply to our category?
Interesting. So when you look back at the journey, both from a content and a technical standpoint, what are some, I would say, key elements or key unknown things that would be interesting to share with us when you look back?
So what I would say is that, it's a lot of tries and errors. Obviously, nothing was right the first time. And sometimes you have to record the same podcast like 2 or 3 times. I had a few microphone failures. Some were memorable because I would not be even able to record the podcast, and we had to give an excuse, and that was it. I have to try several microphones. This is microphone number 4. I'm very happy with it right now, but this is an important thing that we realized while we were working, is that the material that you're using is very important. You need to have a very good microphone. You have to really have someone who knows how to edit your podcast in the right way so the quality is good. We have tried several jingles, and there's one thing that's probably the most annoying stuff is I don't have young kids. My kids are older, they're teenagers now, so they know how to get out of my way when I'm recording a podcast. But I have a cat, and he's very eager to participate in the podcast. So every time I have to kind of chase him, catch him, and get him into another room and close the door. So because you would hear him like mooing all the time, like here, he would be there and he wants to participate. And if it's a video, he would just go on my desk like this. So it's those things, it's the little things. It's now everybody works, I wouldn't say all the time from home, but a lot of us work partially from home. And recording a podcast from home is a challenge in itself. Let's put it that way.
So just to give an idea to our listeners, to at the end broadcast a 15-minute podcast, how long does it take to prepare?
Oh, that's a tough question. So most of my podcasts are scripted. It means that I have in advance a script that I follow as closely as possible. You cannot read it, but it's as close as possible. So you first have to prepare the script. It means a lot of research, obviously. So fortunately, since we had the book, most of the research was already done. But it still takes an hour and a half to prepare a script, and then probably another half hour to kind of polish it in order to be something that you can say, right? So this is like 2 hours to prepare a script. Then you have the recording. A recording for a 15-minute podcast depends on how good you are. Sometimes it's going to take an hour, but most of the time it will take half an hour. And then you have the edition. That will take another hour. So it's half a day to record a podcast.
So it's 1 to 15.
When you're lucky.
So you have for 1 minute of podcast, you need 15 minutes of preparation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Intriguing number. So now you have hit such a huge milestone. What's next? Where do you want to go from there? Podcast number 500, podcast number 1000. Just tell us.
I don't know if we'll get there. I think that there's still many topics to cover. The consulting industry is evolving. A lot of things are changing. So there are many things to say. We see a lot around digitalization and the disruption of the value chain. And this will mean a lot of opportunities for consulting buyers. And I think it's important to share that and show how we can use or not use actually those new business models. So that's that. So, and other topics on procurement as well, going a little bit deeper. We are exploring also new formats, having people on board to share maybe some interviews. So we're trying to kind of renew a little bit the format in order to make it more interesting and broaden a little bit, still staying on that specificity of consulting procurement. But we're also exploring other formats beyond the podcast itself, still on the same topic, but more on the video format on the YouTube channel, for instance. So that's something that we're working on probably for Q3, for September, October. We just launched a new podcast as well, which is called the Procurement Game Changers. It's made of interviews of procurement practitioners, as opposed to me, an expert, talking and giving my perspective on procurement. That there we will have a real executive that are living procurement on a daily basis, that are sharing their vision or their experience on procurement, and still very short format with some really practical steps that people can take on a given topic. And finally, there's one thing that I like to do. I really want to do that. It's something around women in indirect procurement. I wanted to do that this year, but obviously this is not going to happen. So I hope I can start that in the beginning of next year. But I would like to launch something about that. There are many women in indirect procurement, not as much as I'd like to, but still. And I think there's something to do around that, and work on building a community and supporting each other.
So that can be on the list of New Year resolution for 2023.
Yeah, probably.
Speaking of New Year resolution, let's give a few pointers to the people listening that are aspiring podcasters and would like to build and strengthen their thought leadership using this kind of channel. What would be your kind of key recommendations?
So the first thing I would recommend is to not be too ambitious. I think that unless you want to make the podcast your central revenue stream. Because here I'm talking about something that is more on to getting ourselves known, getting some visibility and so on. See, if it's your main revenue stream, then you can be ambitious. But if it's not, as you mentioned before, to produce a 15-minute podcast, it's half day in the week. So the more ambitious you get, the more time you'll spend on it. And it means a lot of time and efforts. And this time you're spending on this, you're not spending on sales, you're not spending on client work. So that's first thing, is like, be conscious of how much time it takes just for a short podcast. The second thing is to be consistent. You need to produce every week. It's not like, oh, I'm going to do 2 and then for 4 weeks, nothing. And then, no, this is not how it works. The way you build your audience is with regularity. It's regularity in content, in quality, in tone, etc. And that means preparing. You need to prepare. It can be something that you say if you're very comfortable saying things out loud without preparation, without too much preparation, fine. But you need to know where you're going. And because when you listen to a podcast, it has to be a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it has to make sense. And this, unless you're the best speaker ever, you can't do that without preparing. And as mentioned before, you need to get the right gear. You need to get the right microphone. If you need some advice, you can ask me. I've tried several brands, so you can ask. But you need to have the right gear, because podcasts, especially audio podcasts, is just audio. And so it has to be as perfect as possible. And one last thing, because I have a few problems with that, is always try to be ahead of a few episodes, because, things can happen. For instance, just say like that, you can get COVID like that and be stuck at home with everyone sick, you're included, and you don't even have a voice to record anything, just saying. And so you have to plan, prepare, and then execute. And it has to become a process where you're always doing the one for next week or the one for 2 weeks from now. So that would be kind of the few tips that I would share.
Well, thanks, Helena. I'll keep that in mind for the podcast I'm supposed to launch for the last 6 months.
Yeah, you'll get there eventually.
It will come one day, I promise. And again, congratulations for reaching this 100 milestone. I hope you will have the opportunity to communicate and have a nice social media coverage on all this. And all things being said, I leave the floor to you for concluding this podcast, because I see that we are reaching the famous 15 minutes time.
Absolutely. So I would say that when we started the Smart Consulting Sourcing podcast, we weren't sure exactly where it would lead us. But as the pandemic began, just at the same moment, it became clear to us that this podcast could become a valuable resource for procurement leaders. And especially in the sourcing industry, which is not really a big fan of change, right? So we also launched a second podcast interview series. We wanted to involve leading professionals in the procurement sector and have them share their stories and their achievements as well. And so I hope it will be as an awesome journey as this podcast was. So thank you everyone for listening, and above all, thank you for being part of this journey. More exciting episode ahead. Let's stay tuned. We need to create a community of sustainable consulting sourcing together. And that marks the end of this special episode. Next week, I will talk about MSA, Master Service Agreement, back to business, right? And how they work for consulting services. So stay tuned. Till then, stay safe and happy sourcing. And if you have other questions about buying consulting and how to stay ahead of the market, remember, you can always contact me directly on LinkedIn or by email, because I'm always game for a chat. Bye and see you next week. Au revoir.